Hello and welcome. My name is Tracy Flenady. I'm the Deputy Dean of Research for the School of Nursing, Midwifery and Social Sciences at CQUniversity Australia. Thank you for taking the time to watch this presentation on finding the main concern when doing classic grounded theory. I hope you find the session interesting and informative. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners and custodians of the land I'm presenting from today, Durrumbal country. I would also like to pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, all of the First Nations people of Australia. Thank you for caretaking our memories and sharing them with us in song, art and stories. I am truly grateful. A little about the university that I'm from, first of all. I'm, like I said, coming to you from Australia, CQUniversity Australia. We have over 20 campuses across regional and metro centres, and we have over 30,000 students who we are dedicated to supporting to achieve their goals and dreams. We offer over 200 courses ranging from certificates to PhD level programs of study. So what is today's session all about? Well, fundamentally, I'm here to talk about classic grounded theory, but more specifically, I'm going to be drilling down into how researchers can find participants' main concern when conducting a classic grounded theory study. Considering classic grounded theory methodology aims to understand how participants resolve a main concern, one would anticipate a plethora of literature discussing how researchers can set out to do this. However, our team have experienced a paucity of information available to novice classic grounded theory researchers to use as resources when undertaking their studies. In this presentation today, I will offer a visual guide using an existing study as the exemplar to assist researchers using classic grounded theory to understand the process involved when identifying participants' main concern. Let's jump right in now and consider what is grounded theory. Grounded theory is a family of research methods aimed at generating a theory to explain a phenomenon experienced by a group of participants. Classic grounded theory is a specific approach that emphasises identifying participants' main concerns. Grounded theory methodology, originally articulated by Glaser and Strauss in the discovery of grounded theory in 1967, was further detailed by Barney Glaser in many books throughout the next 50 years. Others modified the methodology using the same term, grounded theory. In response to the proliferation of modifications being made, Dr. Barney Glaser chose to adopt classic grounded theory as the name of the original version of grounded theory, which he originally developed and continued to write about and teach until his death in 2022. Thank you for Bonnie Glaser's confirmation of how the term was originally coined. Researchers conducting a classic grounded theory study set out to answer two questions. What is the participant's main concern, and how is this concern processed or resolved? Whilst other methodologies highlight participants' perspectives, often describing their experiences, classic grounded theory methods guide the researcher to develop a conceptual theory that explains the participants' behaviour when resolving their concern. To achieve this, data analysis involves progressively raising the conceptual level from raw data to abstract, interconnected ideas. This involves three main coding approaches: open coding, selective coding, and theoretical coding. As I previously mentioned, classic grounded theory studies set out to answer two questions. What is the participant's main concern, and how is this concern processed or resolved? What exactly is the main concern? I'm hearing a lot of mentions of it. I know that when I set out to do my first classic grounded theory over 10 years ago, I thought the main concern was the problem that I wanted to investigate. Little did I know. The main concern is identified as the issue that is evident across the coded data as the shared problem in the research setting. Put simply, it's a core issue shared by participants which needs to be resolved. Identifying the main concern is unique to classic grounded theory, distinguishing it from other grounded theory approaches. The main concern is often referred to as the prime motivator of participant behaviour in the area of interest. These behaviours form patterns that facilitate the identification of the core category and its subcategories to explain how participants solve their main concern. Many theorists contend the main concern should not be known in advance and must be identified during the substantive coding process. This is because the temptation to pre-identify concerns can lead to forced data interpretations. But there is an absence of literature explaining how to achieve this goal. This lack of explanation about the main concern renders classic grounded theory abstract, difficult to interpret, and challenging to use for the novice researcher. This lack of available resources was the impetus for this paper. I'll take a little time now to share some information about the study we used as the exemplar for this paper. The research context was a classic grounded theory study focusing on registered nurses' use of early warning systems in hospitals. The study aimed to explore how nurses balanced their clinical judgment while following early warning system protocols. This study was the work of a PhD student, Justine Connor, who has, of course, given us permission to use her information and is also the first author on this published paper. Recognition and response to clinical deterioration of hospitalised patients is identified as a significant priority area. In response to this concern, international bodies have implemented early warning systems. This is in an effort to keep people safe when they get admitted to hospital. Registered nurses play a central role in providing patient care, and they utilise these early warning system tools, which are supposed to be supported by their clinical judgment when making decisions about patient care. The population for the overarching study were practising registered nurses who engaged with an early warning system vital sign observation tool, that's a mouthful, in their day-to-day role. To be included in the study, the registered nurses must have worked in public hospitals throughout Queensland, Australia. Semi-structured interviews were conducted with 20 registered nurses over a 6-month timeframe. In line with classic grounded theory methodology, data were analysed using the constant comparative approach. Fundamentally, Justine set out to understand how nurses used vital sign observation tool guidelines when trying to incorporate their clinical judgment. As Justine worked through the early stages of her study, she kept a detailed workbook of the coding process, and with her permission, of course, I'm going to share some of that workbook with you today. Justine's frustration in the open coding stage, particularly when it came to identifying the main concern, resulted in our team generating a visual guide that aids in the discovery of the main concern. I'm also going to share that with you today. Let's take a look at the early stages of the project. Data analysis for a classic grounded theory project begins with open coding, where you immerse yourself in the data without any preconceived ideas, and you set out to identify initial concepts or themes. You read through the data multiple times, highlighting or tagging interesting passages or phrases. This is when you will generate initial codes by labelling these passages with descriptive terms or phrases that capture the essence of the data. You will remain open to new ideas and concepts, allowing them to emerge naturally from the data. During this process, the researcher conceptualises early patterns of behaviour. It's at this stage that Barney Glaser says that the data is run open, with the data coded every way imaginable, including with and against all other data. Each datum is to be analysed with the focused intent of identifying what concept it indicates. To achieve this, the following 3 questions are continually asked of the data. What is this data a study of? This question, asked iteratively, helps the researcher to look at the data conceptually and is a constant reminder that the study is about the participants' concerns and not the researchers. What category or property of a category or what part of the emerging theory does this incident indicate? This question helps the researcher to view the data holistically and guides the researcher to constantly compare incidents to emerging categories and to the emerging theory. The question forces the researcher out of individual participant data and enables thinking at a higher level of conceptualisation. What is actually happening in the data? This question encourages inductive analysis of participant concerns through constant comparison of participant data to reach a conceptualised understanding of the resolution of participant concerns. How are the participants resolving their issue? What is going on? What is actually happening? This core variable of the grounded theory analysis is identified when it accounts for most of the variations in behaviour of participants when they in the continual resolution of the participants' main concern. More on that later. Codes are grouped together into categories and then properties are identified that make sense or explain the categories. This approach facilitates the generation of rich and sensitive dimensions of substantive codes, all intrinsically grounded in the data and therefore capable of extraordinary explanatory power. Of note, Glaser reminds us that open coding facilitates the identification of the participant's main concern, the problem that the substantive theory will resolve. Let's take a look at the exemplar to see some open coding in action. Okay, I'm going to share Justine's workbook now and provide you with insight to the open coding process. Oops. Okay, let's try that again. I'm sharing Justine's workbook here now, and I'm going to highlight a few things. I hope it's sharing. I'm not sharing. I will push the share button now. Lucky I checked before I went in too much detail. Okay. Now, I'm going to highlight some important areas of Justine's workbook. First of all, you can see the overarching Grand Tour question is across the top and highlighted in yellow. Just move me out of the way. And this is so we are constantly reminded of the context of the participants' responses. Starting with participant 1 in column B here, this is participant 1. Interview transcripts were read and reread line by line, independently to this spreadsheet. Pieces of them were then lifted and put into this spreadsheet when incidents of note were identified. So imagine having two screens open. One screen has the transcripts and this other screen has your coding workbook open. When you identify incidents of note from the transcripts, you include them into your workbook. Line by line, of course, which Barney Glaser has recommended from the beginning. I think in the beginning everything was done by hand, but I just think that that might have been because computers didn't have the functionality that they do now. Well, that's how I justify it anyway. But using an Excel spreadsheet is very, very handy. Of course, at this stage, it's really important to remain sensitive to everything really, but the words, phrases and sentences that participants used in relation to the overarching question that we asked them, and also the phenomena in general under investigation. As incidents of note were noticed, they were added to column A as initial codes. So you can see that the first code written in column 3 here is working autonomously in the role of an RN. So every single time we found an incident, or Justine found an incident related to that, it was then coded under their participant number in that code there. As participant one's interview transcript was analysed line by line, more codes were generated in column A. So you can see, for example, the next code in row 17 was nursing environment, but as many codes as were generated by each participant were added onto this left column here. Incidents were not limited to one code and could be included or listed under more than one code. So when somebody said something that resonated with one or more codes, that part of the transcript was then recorded or listed under each of those codes. This begins the process of constant comparative analysis, where incidents are compared to other incidents, incidents are compared to codes, codes to codes, all the while using the coding book to keep track of patterns of behaviours and comments. That's the other beauty, I think, of using an electronic tool, because you can use Control F to track things down really easily. These early interviews and the open coding you see here was when Justine was focusing on identifying the participant's main concern. Noting it took 6 interviews, so you can see we go across the page here. 5, 6. It took 6 interviews until the main concern clearly emerged. And that brings us to column H here, because of course memoing continued throughout this iterative process to ensure an audit trail was developed that explained the relationships between incidents and the coding choices. Memoing also records ideas and insights during the coding process and helps avoid forcing data into preconceived categories. Memos were included in column H here. That was just while Justine was coding as well. There also is a memo folder on her computer folder for her thesis project as well, which is quite lengthy. But these were the memos that were generated in the open coding stage. The coding from the 6 interviews culminated in the creation of 23 codes shown in tab 2. So these are the 23 codes that were generated from the first 6 interviews that identified the participant's main concern. But let me tell you, that one sentence says that Justine identified the participant's main concern after 6 interviews, and that statement happens very quickly. But it didn't happen that quickly for Justine, and it wasn't without a lot of anguish, long days and sleepless nights that she arrived at the main concern. Hence the development of the visual guide I'm going to be sharing with you today. And I'll just switch screens back again, get the recording. Okay, back to it. So I talked to you about the 23 codes. I failed to mention, though, that Justine had collapsed those into 6 conceptualised categories. And from that, the conceptualisation occurred for the main concern. But like I said, it didn't just happen like that. And there was a lot of pain involved, mental pain. Okay, so I just showed you the coding book, but now I'm going to summarise what Justine found in the open coding stage. Data indicated that the participants often experienced unease between complying with the early warning system observation tool protocols and trusting their clinical judgment. We could see that the RNs were experiencing cognitive dissonance. Cognitive dissonance is defined as the discomfort experienced by a person trying to meet two or more conflicting demands at the same time, or from having to engage in activities conflicting with their belief or values. Nurses explain their feeling, actions, and behaviours with many different words, hence all of the codes, but describing similar situations or incidences. They were telling a similar story in different ways, using different words and examples, patterns that Justine identified. Understanding how to conceptualise the meaning from the data is a method that is quite precise and in nature, yet requires an open mind and unbiased approach to coding. And this is where Justine, the primary author of the early warning system study, realised that she needed some type of framework or visual guide to assist her understand the data. There were literally hundreds of pieces of data revealing a shared concern, but she needed some method to arrive at clarity to help make sense of it all. Oh, I love this image and the message it portrays. Justine, the primary author of the project, we present as the exemplar, used this image to illustrate her frustration at trying to locate the main concern of her participants. She'd collected between 20 and 30 hours. That's a lot of data. And she was analysing it all, and she felt like she didn't have a clear roadmap. She felt overwhelmed a lot of the time, feeling as though she would never find the needle in the haystack. Rest assured, this story has a happy ending. Recognising the lack of clarity around this important step in classic grounded theory, our team aimed to develop a simple visual guide to support Justine and future classic grounded theory researchers to identify participants' main concern when conducting classic grounded theory studies. Our framework demonstrates the process of moving from coding to conceptualising the data through to constant comparison and finally identifying the main concern. This framework provides a visual guide illustrating how open coding was used to move from transcribed data and memos, field notes, to code the incidents. As noted on the bottom of the guide, the main concern will be resolved by the core category, which is yet to be identified. Selective coding continues with constant comparative analysis methods to identify and then strengthen the core category and subcategories. And it was through the use of the iterative process that the framework depicts that Justine was able to lift her level of conceptualisation to identify the participant's main concern, which was compliance with early warning system protocols is sometimes incongruent with nurses' clinical judgment. Through the open coding phrase, Justine could see that the RNs were experiencing cognitive dissonance because of this. The discomfort experience when trying to meet two or more conflicting demands. She had conceptualised a meaning that accounted for all the participants' various comments and statements about the source of their cognitive dissonance. It was a breakthrough moment. What she'd condensed down to find was that RNs recognised the value and safety net of the early warning systems, but registered nurses don't want to only rely on the value of early warning systems to assess the whole patient picture. They don't want the values of the early warning system tool to override their clinical judgment when providing care for a patient. And registered nurses don't want the values of early warning systems to override their clinical judgment when justifying escalating care for a patient. Then, of course, once we'd identified the main concern, we then moved on to identifying how they resolved this main concern. We're not going to go through that with you today because that's a whole other paper and that's Justine's story to share. That is the outcome of her PhD. What I'm going to finish off with today are a couple of implications. First of all, for nursing practice from the exemplar and then for research. So I won't spend too much time on this. In terms of the exemplars study, which was Justine's study, implications for nursing practice, the study's findings have the potential to inform training programs and policy decisions, guiding nurses to resolve conflicts between their clinical judgment and system protocols. The findings definitely support enhanced integration of clinical autonomy with standardised systems like early warning system protocols. Basically, give the nurses more say. Implications stemming from the development of the visual guide or framework for identifying the main concern in classic grounded theory studies, we found had 5 main implications. The visual guide provides a structured approach for novice researchers to identify the main concern in classic grounded theory studies, reducing the uncertainty and complexity of the process. This guide can be integrated into classic grounded theory training programs to offer step-by-step instructions and practical examples. By offering a visual representation of the process, the guide can help standardise how classic grounded theory is conducted across studies, ensuring that the identification of the main concern follows a consistent and reliable path. This will increase the rigour and credibility of classic grounded theory research across disciplines. The visual guide can serve as a teaching tool in a graduate research methods courses, offering students concrete method for approaching classic grounded theory studies, or at least this component of the study. It helps demystify the often abstract nature of classic grounded theory by providing a visual framework for understanding and applying the methodology. Finally, we believe that this work advances qualitative research. The development of this visual guide represents an advancement in qualitative research methods, particularly in classic grounded theory, by bridging the gap between abstract theoretical concepts and practical hands-on research. It enhances the accessibility of classic grounded theory for researchers at all levels. These implications highlight how the visual guide not only simplifies the process for researchers, but also strengthens the quality and consistency of classic grounded theory studies, providing long-term benefits for the academic and research community. As we wrap up today's session, I hope it has become clearer to you that the identification of the main concern in classic grounded theory research is not just an academic exercise. It is the foundation upon which meaningful and insightful theories are built. Through the use of this framework, we have made the process of uncovering the main concern more accessible, particularly for novice researchers who often find themselves overwhelmed by the complexity of classic grounded theory. The development of this visual guide offers a structured, step-by-step approach that simplifies the journey from raw data to conceptual clarity. It empowers researchers to navigate the iterative nature of coding, comparison, and theory generation with more confidence and precision. By making the implicit explicit, this framework contributes to standardising classic grounded theory practices, providing transparency in the research process and promoting richer, more reliable findings. Ultimately, it's a tool that supports not only researcher development, but also advances the entire field of qualitative research. In closing, I hope this guide becomes an invaluable resource for future researchers, offering clarity, direction, and support as they embark on their own classic grounded theory studies. Thank you for your attention today, and I encourage you to think about how this framework can enhance your own research practice and methodologies. And of course, if you'd like to discuss any aspect of this presentation, please send me an email on t.flenady@cqu.edu.au. I'd love to hear from you. I really would.